Welcome to Live Free, Ride Free, where we talk to people who have lived self-actualized lives on their own terms and find out how they got there, what they do, how we can get there, what we can learn from them, how to live our best lives, find our own definition of success, and most importantly, find joy. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times best-selling author of The Horse Boy, founder of New Trails Learning Systems and LongRideHome.com. You can find details of all our programs and shows on rupertisaacson.com. Welcome back to Live Free, Ride Free, where we talk to people who are living self-actualized lives, people who are effectively living the dream. How have they managed to do it? What does it mean for them, their dream? What can we learn from them? How can mentorship from them help us to achieve our dreams too, and to live free and ride free in the way that's right for us? So today I've got Lisa Diersen. Lisa Diersen runs something rather unique called the Equus Film Festival. That's right. It's a film festival dedicated to telling stories through the medium of the horse. And people might think, well, that's a bit niche. That's a bit, but actually, no, it's one of those worlds that crosses over into so many other worlds because there's so many people that like horses. And yet there's so many people that like film. And there's so many people that like story. And there's so many people that are either on the fringe of that or right in the middle of it. If you look up any list of Hollywooders, you'll see that at least half of them are into horses in some way. And if you like, the horse represents, I think, to humans, an idea of dream, an idea of allegory, an idea of a lot of people think about horses and use terminology around horses. Oh, she's a real stallion. Oh, he's a bit of a wild stallion. Oh, rein in that thought, curb your enthusiasm. All of these things actually come from horses. And something like Equus Film Festival sits square in the middle of, I think, what horses mean as a metaphor for humans. But Lisa Diersen's made an absolute success out of this. Lisa, thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, Rupert, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a treat. Lisa, I've known you for quite a while, years or something like that. I remember when we were meeting at horse shows. Both of us are enthusiasts of the Lusitano horse breed. And then I remember you saying, oh yeah, I've got this idea. I think I want to do this film festival. And yeah, it won't be, anything big. It was just, I just kind of want to give it a go. And now it's huge and it's international. So tell us how you got there. Why did you come up with this idea?
You, simply put, you and your documentary about your son were the reason that this film festival got started. And yeah, going back and thinking back at the Andalusian show in Texas and seeing your film the first time. And I remember being so moved because it lit me up, literally, because I felt that, wow, here's what's missing in the world. People don't feel enough empathy for what someone else is going through, whether it's the family unit, what you all went through now with us, with Josh, because I have a Down syndrome grandson who we've made a documentary about as well. The general public doesn't have that empathy when they see a family with a crying, screaming child. They automatically think, oh, something's wrong with those parents, or get that kid in line. And when I saw your documentary and I saw the struggle, which it truly was at that time, a struggle because it's a journey that's led you so many places, I went, oh my gosh, I want everybody I know to see this film because the story is so important. And not because it was a horse story, because of course I love it because it's a horse story, but mainly because of the deeper felt message and kind of what you were talking about earlier. How many films we've had in the festival that center around mental health issues, physical limitations, veterans who contemplate committing suicide, youth in crisis, all of these, this general public encompassing our world of people in crisis. And what's the thing that's out there to help all of them? It's the horse, and it's telling those stories with the horses. And we've had so many of those documentaries in the festival, and they're so powerful. No matter where I show them or when I show them, people leave in tears because of the power of that. So that was the catalyst that made the whole festival start. Simply put, you.
Well, you're very kind. And, it was amazing of you to have us there with the Horseboy movie at the first film festival in New York. But there must have always been in your mind, since you were a little girl, something around story and horse. Take us back to when you were small. Did you have an idea like this? Was something cooking, or was it an amalgam of other ideas? What started it all off?
I've always been around horses. My grandmother had horses, a pony. I always had a little pony. Sparkplug was my first pony's name.
And where did you grow up, by the way, Lisa?
I grew up outside of Chicago in a suburb called LaGrange, but my parents' family lived down in Kentucky. So on my grandmother's farm, every summer we'd go down and spend time with her at the farm and the horses and the pony. And, always being around, and we would always take this pony out, create games and tell stories and create little alternate towns and things to do. And we were different people with the pony, and to tell storytelling. I think somewhere in the back of my mind, always wanting to tell stories, or at least share stories, has something that's I've always wanted to, always had back there percolating. And kind of life gets in the way, and I ended up in the engineering field of all things for quite a while, and then building houses. And the horses were always the constant. I always either had a horse or was riding or involved with horses, involved with teaching young people with Pony Club. I went through many years of being an unmounted Pony Club instructor for all the D-level there's the Jack Russell for a long time. And then it's just always has been there, bringing people together around horses.
What do you think it is about the horse that serves as this catalytic factor with humans? Because it seems that people don't even need to ride to have a fascination.
Right.
With the horse.
And
what is it, do you think?
Well, first of all, I believe that it's a 1,200-pound electromagnetic field drawing us in. And it's also a 1,200-pound metaphor for everything that's in our life. But even with my friends, I had quite a few friends that just have a horse to have that horse, and they go and they'll brush the horse at night. They'll do stuff with the horse. They'll long line. They'll do everything but ride the horse. And that's okay for them. There's entire Facebook groups dedicated to people who are just the non-ridden horse. And everybody thinks that you have to be in the horse you have to ride the horse to be in the horses. And that's so wrong. One of the things with the film festival is people thought, well, there's only so many or out there horse people riding, and they don't have hours in the day. There's so many non-riding horse people that are moved by these stories and that magnetism of the horse that just draws them in, from watching Misty of Chincoteague when we were kids, and all of those stories. This is funny that you say that, because we talk about this all the time. It's part of our general conversation when we have our Mustang summits or whatever. There's just something about these horses. And when we use horses in the mental health field, and you see the results that you can't get anywhere else with any other metaphor, tool, or just even simple talk therapy. You can't get there where you can get there with a horse.
Talk to me about this business of being an electromagnetic field. That's fascinating. Okay, so you say the horse is a 1,200-pound electromagnetic field. How so, and how does that benefit people?
So when we're around another human, basically, you're equal. We're you're whether it's a big person or a little person. Basically, your weights are 120, 130 pounds to each other. You bring a horse in, it's 10 times what energy and feeling that we are. So I just think they help balance us that way. It's, you can't.
What is throwing out that electromagnetic field that you're referring to?
What do I just think I just think it's pure energy. I think I can watch a horse across an arena at a horse. You can do this at a horse show. Watch a horse. One horse goes crazy. Everybody around it feels it. And if you're a more sensitive person, Temple Grandin comes to mind. People who are really sensitive can feel that. When you're working with horses a lot, you can feel when a horse is uncomfortable. You can feel that kind of waves that a mare standing in a field with a bunch of other mares and babies. When that coyote is out across at the corner of the field, that one mare turns up, looks, and everyone can feel that just by her simple head, bring your head up. It's just, it's very forceful. The energy of the horse.
Yeah, what I'm wondering about is, you're probably aware of this. I know that there's an organization, research institute called the Heart Math Institute, which has been doing research into the electromagnetic fields thrown out by hearts of one kind or another, and finding that the larger the heart, the greater the electromagnetic field it throws out. If our relatively small hearts throw out a certain electromagnetic field, this huge heart throws out a much bigger one.
Yes.
How do you feel that benefits a human to be in the presence of a greater electromagnetic field coming from a larger heart?
I think it's especially with animals, because the bigger the electromagnetic field is going to be, the bigger animal, definitely. But if they're sentient animals like a horse or an elephant or a peaceful animal, they're going to bring that peaceful energy to you. And I see it from when I used to do work in the equine assisted therapy field. What would happen when a horse would be around someone in crisis? It's undeniable. You can't work with someone and be in an equine assisted, whether it's psychotherapy or just general therapy situation, and deny what happens between a person and a horse. And I think it's just because the horses are just, you can't go into an arena working with a horse in a equine assisted therapy setting with a bad attitude, because the horse is going to just turn around and blow you off. It will just ignore you. I mean, I've seen so many amazing things happen in therapy sessions that, there are books and films about it. It's just undeniable. I mean, what happened with your son? How do you explain that?
Well, sure. And, when my son in the early days would just lie on Betsy, that was the mare he became close to. He would lie on her back. This is before we even started riding together. And he would use her body like a big old couch. And all of his agitated behaviors would just disappear. And I had no idea why until some years later, even after we had been practicing, horseboy method and so on. Then I think it was Linda Tellington-Jones who came along and said, "Oh yes, the Heart Math Institute. You put your heart into the close range heart to heart with a much greater electro." And it's interesting that you say a peaceful animal, because of course I guess you could say, an angry polar bear might not be quite so, good for us.
No.
And different type of hug. And this seems to bring our hearts into what they call coherence, meaning that the way in which the rhythms of the ventricles as they're pumping become much more stable, slow down. And that seems to bring our brain waves down at the same time, because of course hearts are composed of neurons. The gut is composed of neurons and the brain is composed of neurons. So it seems to then bring one from that sort of busy brain, the beta brain state, to more of an alpha meditative brain state. Because I didn't know any of this at the time. I just, observed it, but it was very interesting when it was explained to me. You said something else though about the horse as metaphor, which I really like. And I presume that to understand the horse as a metaphor, you don't necessarily even have to be a horse person. What do you feel horses are as a metaphor for humans?
I think it depends on the human and what the human is going through, whether for me, the horse is, actually, I think a metaphor of I can do it,
Possibility.
like nothing's too big.
Potential.
Possibility, perfect word. For a veteran who's just handed a letter to a therapist that said, before I got into this equine program, I was thinking about committing suicide. That horse could be a metaphor for living and for life and for, surviving. And it's so funny. And I've watched in the last 30 years how all of these people who were considered fringe before, but now that the science is balancing with the knowledge and it's all coming together. Even when EGALA, when Equine Assisted Growth and Learning Association started, it was not considered what it is now, which is a gold standard for the equine therapy field and in the psychology field. So I've watched all of this kind of these pieces come together, and now the general public and even non-horse people are getting an understanding. When I have a conversation with someone who works for the Veterans Administration in their recreational therapy department, because that's what equine assisted therapy is generally considered with the VA, it's still considered recreational therapy until there's enough research and data and study that comes in through accredited resources that they'll be able to actually bring it in as a therapeutic use with veterans. But we all know, everyone who's been out there, and especially now with the Mustangs, because we're doing so much more with Mustang horses, watching how, because of the PTSD that the Mustang horse goes through, balancing with the PTSD that veterans go through, whether it's an accredited program or not, those programs work.
You're talking about
the
trauma that Mustang goes through in being captured as a child and
or even being separated because they're family based. The herds are. I mean, there's a huge movement going on right now to stop the helicopter roundups. There's actually a bill in Congress. Colorado is the first state that passed legislature they have an entire group now and funding that's going to be dedicated to taking care of what the Mustang issue is going on in Colorado. So, and these horses form family bands. So they're going through trauma as they're getting torn apart, and the mares and the foals are getting separated and all of that. But that balances what the veterans go through, and that works. And it doesn't have to be a PATH or an EGALA certified program with veterans. It seems to be that as long as a group of veterans have gotten together with their horses and they work with each other, if you're stopping someone from committing suicide, something is working.
Absolutely.
And something is working with the horse. But when you talk about the heart math, that's another thing that was considered kind of fringe until just recently. We're doing a lot of, in fact, next week we'll be filming in Indiana, or the first week of July, we'll be filming in Indiana where we're using brain-based neural pathway release work with Mustangs. And for our documentary series, the Mustang Story documentary series that we started 2 years ago. And it works. When you watch these horses in this program, it's just amazing how well it works, waiting for those dopamine and serotonin hits and teaching the horses how to give themselves those dopamine and serotonin hits, which changes the whole training. There's people out there doing amazing work, which is I feel that with the film festival or with what I do just in general is I kind of act as a connector for all of these stories and things out there that either are brought to me or we find or we help get those stories out to everybody else who has no idea. There's still people who I refer your documentary to that sit after they watch it and go, I had no idea. I had no idea. And now they know. And once you see, you can't unsee. So now you know that horses can do this. So you're moved to continue to tell people about all the things that horses can do.
So what you're really talking about with the film festival, of course, is the healing power of story. In your case, the stories happen to be about horses. But I guess story, people talk about us as, or the name for our species is Homo sapiens sapiens, the thinking ape. But I've always thought that was a rather asinine title for us because everything thinks, right? If you have a brain, you think. It's nothing special about our species that way. But we do have a larynx. We speak. We're the speaking ape. Other animals vocalize, and they can vocalize obviously in a very complex way, but they don't write rap or, Shakespeare or, epic poetry or whatever. That's us. We're the storytelling ape. And it seems, the time I've spent in indigenous communities with shamans and healers and that sort of thing, that story seems to also be very tied up with healing, in that it seems to be the original form of medicine, in that even actually in modern medicine, what happens, you go to see the doctor with a story. You say, this is happening. This did happen. This has happened. This is happening now. What's the story? And the doctor goes off. The shaman would go into the spirit world. The doctor goes into their notes and their research, and then they come back with a set of instructions and sort of create a new story, which could be done through drugs. It could be done through, a psychic medium. It could be not a medium in terms of connecting with the dead, but in terms of a channel. It could be done through many ways. It could be both. It could be all, but nonetheless, that seems to be what happens. It's a storytelling process. Where did storytelling begin for you as a girl? Were you always enamored of story?
Oh, yeah, I was an avid reader. My mother was very ill while I was growing up. And so reading was a great escape for me. And of course, it was reading every horse book that was ever written. And now seeing some of those horse books that have been turned into movies, and that if you're a little girl and you read all the whole Black Stallion series, and then you could watch the Black Stallion movie, that was my escape. So reading horse books, I have shelves full of all the horse books that I've read when I was a kid. I was able to find those books. But that's one of the other things with Equus is we have we have books. We have usually 60 or so books that get entered every year.
Oh, so you're a literary festival as well as a film festival?
We're literary, we're art, we're podcast.
Okay.
Any form of storytelling in the equine world.
Okay.
We award that.
So for listeners, if you've got a book in you, get writing. You might be able to submit it. What was your mother sick with? What was the issue with her?
Oh, my mother had giant bone cell cancer, which back when I was growing up, we didn't have even anywhere near the medicine that we have now. But she had bone cell cancer. She had lost a leg to that. And then
at what age was she when that really kicked in, and what age were you?
I was, okay. So I remember on my 13th birthday was when they told us as a family that they were going to amputate her leg. But she was, okay, we go back. My brother died when my mom was 5 months pregnant with me in a tragic accident in our basement. He fell off of a pogo stick my older sister was bouncing him on, hit a tool in my dad's workshop, and it went into his ear and punctured his eardrum and went into his brain. And he lived maybe 3 days. So they didn't think that they thought my mom was going to lose me. She didn't, but she really never recovered. Don't think from that point on. I think until she passed away, and she was, I believe, 64, 65 when she passed away, actually, and it was diabetes related. Her body, she just, with that moment with my brother, I just think she just, I don't have any other memories of, as a child, of her not being sad, I guess. You're
So
not
she
being
was sick and sad all through your childhood.
sick and sad all through my childhood. And my
Right.
little sister,
Say that again.
and my little sister, I had a sister that came a couple of years after I was born, but she was never, my mom was never well. So between being physically or mentally, she was never really well.
And your older sister, who had been bouncing your brother on the pogo stick, she must have, of course, suffered terribly. Guilt and so
yes.
forth.
Yeah. And it wasn't until probably 30 years later, and it was after my mother passed away, that I had an uncle who was a priest, and he had a long talk with my sister where and then you talk about how people carry stuff. She really finally opened up and let loose, and how, it had affected her entire life.
Yeah.
So, you watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. I grew up very acutely aware of how one action affects everything. And so you have to consciously make decisions in your life to not fall into, let's look at conscious decisions in your life all the way along, not to fall into any, doing things that negative. You need to work on positivity.
Tell me about your father. Where was he in all this?
Oh, he was my dad. I love my dad. My dad was great. He was always there. He was always took care of my mother. And she was not a happy person to take care of. He worked all the time. So
What did he do?
he was a plant manager for a big aluminum rolling mill. He was a mechanical manager for that. My brother who passed, I kind of took his place with my dad. So I was always kind of doing, I don't want to call them boy things, but there wasn't anything my dad ever told me I couldn't do. So if he was up fixing shingles on a roof, I was up fixing shingles on a roof with him, changing tires. I mean, learning how to change the oil in a car. If he did it, he wanted me to know how to do it.
Did he teach all the kids, and you just happen to have more of an aptitude for that sort of practical stuff, or did you all, in fact?
There was a big difference. My older sister was 13 years older, so I don't have much of a memory of her. She got 18, so her oldest daughter is the same age as my sister. So I don't have that memory of my older sister with my dad. And my little sister, my mom was so ill at that point that my dad spent more time taking care of that end of my mother than. So I was kind of always referred to as my dad's sidekick.
Okay. Because you had a much older one, a much younger one. You were sort of in the middle and
Yep.
able to.
Middle child syndrome.
Okay. Interesting. So you have a positive dad, but a mum who is basically sick with sadness and grief, and you find story and you find horse stories as a way to escape into happiness. What were the stories that really stood out for you at that age?
Black Beauty, I love the Billy and Blaze stories. I love the Black Stallion stories, Misty of Shinkatee, just always like horse hero stories. I love those kinds of stories.
Horse hero stories. So horses that were somewhat against the odds.
Yes.
like the Black Beauty story, sold to bad people surviving. And that, I guess, you were taking us back to the idea of the horse as a metaphor. Would you think it was clear to say that even if it was unconscious, you were putting yourself perhaps in the horseshoes of these underdog horse characters that were suffering? Would that be correct to say?
Probably dead on. Probably.
Did you at some point want to tell story? Did you at some point say, well, I want to write, I want to create story, or was it different somehow?
I like telling stories through pictures and film versus writing. And that's evolved. That's really evolved in the last 20 years with doing that. I love that, having bred the Lusitano horses, the horses that I think every baby that we've had that's hit the ground is part of a story. And so following every one of our foals as they grow up and what they're doing, that's just more of the way to tell those stories.
So sort of living stories, really.
Mm-hmm. Living stories like that, like Josh's story, kind of like your son's story. I like those stories where they can still continue because people still want to know what's going on with Rowan. Josh still loves the fact that now we can take pictures of him 4 or 5 years later, and he's now riding his mom's Lusitano mare and taking riding classes with her. And, it's continuation. It's not something that has an ending. So it just continues.
You get into story partly to assuage this, to survive really, or to thrive in this in this house full of grief, as well as, of course, your relationship with your dad and so on. You say that living stories and latterly film. Had you always sort of wanted to be a filmmaker? Were there films that you watched was there always this little bit of you say, I want to do that, but I just don't know how I'm going to do that?
I don't know if it was something consciously that I had. I've always been a creator. So when I was in engineering at General Motors, you're creating, you're taking blueprints and creating something that will grow into being a part in a truck or a car. That evolved into building houses and developing subdivisions. I love the creative process. I love taking something that is just an idea and turning it into something, whatever it is, whether it's a story or a house or a barn. I'm working right now on a friend's barn, so you can't get away from it.
No, sure. And I think, creative people will always do. It's very interesting to hear you say actually that the creative process of an auto part is because of course it's as creative as a movie or a book or a piece of art. We often don't think of it that way until, of course, we see them. They say it was a Roman artifact or an Egyptian artifact, which was just a tool on display in the Met or something like that. Oh, wow, it's beautiful, amazing. Look at that technology. It's incredible. What's the story behind that? Because if we see, that because the junk of today is tomorrow's archaeology, as they say. So everything has that creative process. It's good to be reminded.
A button does.
Yes, you're right. A button does.
A button.
Process. You as that little girl with story, was there a part of you that said, I want to tell stories, or was it not conscious?
I think it was always conscious. Tell stories or create something. Just do something. I mean, I was always doing something, whether it was cooking, gardening. Maybe I did write a few little stories when I was a kid. I was never like drawing. Like it's still a stick horse. Okay. Like, thank God for Adobe, because I can really get kind of creative, but with Photoshop, but writing and film photo has always been a great, a good way for me to put a story together.
Did you pick up a camera young?
I think I had one of those that you clicked and the picture came out of. But yeah, I've always had a camera. I always had, when video cameras first came out, even, with even just with doing stuff with trips or whatever, I was always the one taking the pictures, capturing the moments to
But
tell the story.
would you say primarily then you instinctively realized very young that the way to heal was through positive creative action, basically?
Oh, yes.
And did somebody
yes.
tell you that? Like, did your dad tell you that? Or did a mentor tell you that? Or did you just come to that? Was it one of those households where it wasn't openly discussed? Or did your dad say, actually, listen, this is the way? Or was it intuitive?
I don't think he ever said as much so, listen, this is the way. I remember with him never telling me I couldn't. I remember very distinctly with him one time. One of the facilities he worked at, they had a metal cooling, a problem on how to cool metals. And I drew him up a little schematic, and he didn't downplay it. He was like, well, that's great. It's good to think about that and problem solve and try to work out the problems. I was never told I couldn't, if I wanted to do something, I couldn't, you can't do that. You can't do that because you're a girl. So I was never put that way, and nowadays, well, they still have, and we're going to have to go back so many light years now between Roe v. Wade and Barbie for girls with getting back to where they had told they could do something. You're like, yeah, well, no, now you've got girls, so, or girl, but no, being able to just create if I wanted to. So,
and so do you think it was just more that you yourself realized that staying creative was the way to find healing, rather than
yes.
somebody specifically saying, this is how to find healing?
Yes, I would say that.
And now, of course, here you are with a festival that's primarily about healing, under the masquerading as a festival about horses. What made you think festival? Have you always liked the idea of groups of people coming together to celebrate creativity in that sort of way? Like, at what point did festival creep in?
The festival creeped in when we were breeding the horses, and you, with your documentary, we were doing, the town I was in, there was no horse event around. So I had the bright idea of, let's try to do, with some friends, let's try to do a festival that addresses equine assisted therapy, that addresses the African American community with their horses, because in Chicago, there's a bunch of guys who are Buffalo Soldiers. Plus there's also a big Black cowboy community in Chicago. We have a wonderful Hispanic community in the area that does Musa, a lot of the beautiful dancing.
By the way, for those who don't know what that is, that's the female side saddle mounted displays, right, in the Mexican tradition.
Beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And then we have classical riding and along with art and literature. So we were going to create a festival that kind of addressed things that aren't at your average horse show. And we had Native Americans too. We had a big Native American component to the festival. It was called Festival of the Horse and Drum. And that was when we did the very first film festival. And I have a friend who owns a theater in town. And I asked him if I could show your film because you had just broken your leg. So you were not going to be able to come, but you were going to Skype in, which I broke my leg last year. So I had to follow in your footsteps. But we had that. And so I asked Ron, I said, can we show some film or show this documentary? He goes, yeah, you can show it. It's a beautiful little theater. And so after he said yes, I said, well, what if I got a few more? Because you know how I am, Robert. I can't just stop. And so I had 30 films the first year, and that kind of let me know that this is something that is out there. All of these films are out there because we had jousters too. So for every aspect of what we had at that festival, there was a documentary that existed in the world that was a counterpart, a complement to that. So the therapy part, we had yours. We had a Nakota horse stories. We had a documentary about a beautiful Escaramuza documentary. We had a jousting documentary. We had the Black Rodeo, which was held in Harlem back in the 70s, a documentary on that. So there were so many stories out there before we even tried to put out a call for equine themed documentaries that it just kind of let me know that there might be something to this.
And then I guess your background with engineering must have come in handy in terms of the logistics and the organization and the sort of nuts and bolts side.
Yeah. It's just piecing the puzzle together.
So it's been quite a few years now that you've been running this festival. What are the stories that really, really stand out for you that we should all be aware of? Because there'll be people who are driving their cars listening to this. So I want to tell you guys at this point, pull over and get the notebook out.
Or we could put in your show notes.
Exactly. And of course, you can also listen to this, later on. But what are the must-sees and the must-reads that you've come across over the years that you're like, whoa, this one changed my life, this one changed my life, that we might not know about? What are the stories that we should know? I'm getting my notebook out too.
Well, this is the 11th season with this film festival, and we've had over 600 films submitted into this festival, which is kind of mind blowing when you sit back and think of it. But there's one actually there's two that really stick out in my mind, but one is called Healing Horses. And these are short. These are under 20 minutes.
So tell us about Healing Horses, the Healing Horses doc.
The Healing Horses documentary is about a young lady who has a car accident on the 4th of July. So immediately you must think it's a teenager out drinking and driving, which it totally wasn't. But she learns how to walk again with the therapeutic use of this big draft horse, which happens to also be at a world equestrian level draft horse that teams that come into the United States. Karen is the lady who runs the program, is also a coach for a lot of the teams. And so she'll use this draft horse, who is on his side gig, is being used as a therapy horse. And the other one was an early on documentary called Riding My Way Back. And it was about a veteran who got into a program, just met this horse, kind of standoffish for a great part of it, but then got into a real one-on-one relationship with the horse. And when he was about 4 weeks into the program, maybe it was 4 months, turned around and gave his therapist a letter. And the letter had said how he was going to commit suicide the night that he called to say goodbye to the horse. And because of this horse, he didn't do that. And now he is mentoring other veterans, and he's part of the program, and he's engaged to this beautiful young girl. And, it's just such a feel good, amazing story, but it's what horses can do for us.
Riding My Way Back.
Yeah. Robin Rosenthal was a filmmaker. Beautiful documentary.
Rosenthal. Okay. And Healing Horses? Who was the
that was way back in the beginning. I'd have to look up who that filmmaker was. But there's just so many amazing ones. We're working on a project right now that kind of goes back to the Mustang series we're working on, called The whole project is called the Mustang Discovery Ride Project. But I
The
had a young
Mustang
girl.
Discovery Ride.
Yes. So 2 years ago, actually, it's funny, 2 years ago today, I met a young lady in Montana, Bozeman, Montana, at Art of the Cowgirl, who they were looking for someone to help them pull together their project. And they were starting in Delaware. So logistically, them coming out of Montana or Wyoming and getting them to Delaware was a project and a half. But they rode from Delaware to California, all the way across the United States, almost 5,000 miles, with 4 Mustangs and a mule stang. And all the way across the country, we set up meetings and seminars and clinics at different veterans or youth programs across the country for her to speak at as she rode. And finding all of these places non-connected to different associations. These are just kind of standalone places where the horses are healing people, mostly Mustangs. But that's just amazing. So that documentary is, Julianne Neal is working on getting that finished out. I know you met her years ago, and she's been an important part of Equus, but was the chief filmmaker on that documentary. So that hopefully will be ready, by sometime next year, because there's a year and a half's worth of footage, because we wrapped that last November on the beach in California.
Tell me, I mean, as a filmmaker myself, I immediately think, oh, that sounds expensive. How did she finance that ride? That's not a cheap thing to do. And then to make a documentary around it. What were the mechanisms there?
So we had, because it was Mustangs, we had some support from the Mustang Heritage Foundation, which supported until about halfway through, and then they ran out of their support. We had to really scramble, but because I have some amazing filmmakers all the way across the country, and Julianne was willing to kind of oversee the main part of the putting everything together, I had different filmmakers who came in and rode with Lisanne and would film and do some riding. And Rhonda Gregorio, who's working on the Mustang book project, she came in and rode in Washington, D.C. with us. We rode all the way down out of, I can't remember the name of the park, but through this park all the way along into downtown D.C. up to the Washington Monument with these Mustangs, which was one of the most nerve-wracking but exciting things that I've ever done. And but I have had an amazing group of filmmakers across the country who were willing to just come on and ride for a couple of weeks with her, or drive along, or do whatever, or follow, or ride in the chase car and film and get parts of this story. So from that point of view, I mean, it's going to be a little rougher, but we just screened one of the best documentaries I've seen called The Long Rider, which was about Felipe Lete, The Long Rider. That came out, that was part of the festival last year. That's a 90-minute documentary. Felipe rode from Canada to Brazil.
Felipe
He did Lete.
How do I spell that?
I think it's Letie. I will get you that, because I think he needs to be on your show. But
Felipe Lete, okay. Brazilian guy?
Pardon me?
Brazilian guy?
Yes. And he lives in Canada now. But his family, it's an amazing story. And so he did most of his own filming with with his phone or with a GoPro. And, when you're telling a story of riding across the country, you want to see it from the seat of the rider. You want that bird's eye view as you're going across, kind of like what Ben Masters did with Unbranded. That was one of our first documentaries we had in the festival, was Unbranded, and that still stands up. It's beautiful and breathtaking. But Felipe rode from Canada to Brazil, then from Brazil to the furthest, most southern tip you can ride, I think, in Argentina. Then they went back up. He went up to Alaska and rode from Alaska back down to Calgary, Canada. So that's an amazing
And what was
story.
he trying to achieve with this? Why did he do this crazy ride?
To ride the three with Shipley's book about riding the Americas. He wanted to follow Shipley's story, and so and he's a character. You'll love him. He's a character. He's a great interview. He's just such an amazing young man.
What
But
was he trying to bring attention to any cause, or what was the catalyst?
No, not really to any cause. It was more that he could do this.
Mm-hmm.
Long riders are, with Lisanne, it was different because we were riding, we were doing the Mustang horses were the whole focus of this, to bring awareness to all the horses that are standing in BLM hold, which is right now close to 70,000 horses that they've rounded up. They're standing and holding. We can use them in veterans programs. We can use them in mental health programs with youth. We can use them. They're wonderful riding horses. They're great all around horses. So that was what our project was about, bringing awareness to these horses and holding. Rupert was a long rider. And
Felipe.
In the world, there's an pardon me?
So Felipe was
Felipe?
Yeah. When you say a long rider, what does that
Yes.
mean? What's a long rider?
So there's an organization called the Long Riders Guild. I think they're based out of either Ireland. I think it's Ireland. The main rider or the organization is out of, but it's an organization that if you ride more than 1,000 miles in your ride from start to get up, for the ride to end, you qualify to be a long rider, and that you can join the Long Riders Guild then. Bernice Endy, who we had the documentary a couple of years ago about Lady Long Rider, she passed away a year and a half ago, but she rode 30,000 miles across the United States. There's all of these people out there that do this, that go out.
They're not doing it for any specific cause. They're doing it as a personal odyssey.
No. Yep. Bernice got divorced, and when she got divorced, she got on her horses and just started riding. She was going to ride to go visit her sister, and she just kept riding. And she kept riding until her last long ride was 2 months before she died of cancer. She just kept riding. There's just people who, it's like a runner. It's like anybody else that wants to get out there in their sport, achieve for their personal best.
Well, what immediately springs to mind when you talk about these rides is, he said she just kept riding. Remember Forrest Gump? He starts running and then he just keeps running. And of course, he builds his following. But of course, what he's really doing it for is healing. Do you think that
yes,
clearly this lady who died of cancer with her 30,000 miles was after her divorce? That seems to be a healing journey.
Trying to be healed.
Is Felipe with his Canada to Tierra del Fuego and back up? Is he looking for healing as well?
He talks completely and openly about his search for healing and how the horses for his mental health. One of the organizations that we're working with now is Horses for Mental Health.
Horses for Mental Health.
2-year-old organization. Lynn Thomas, who's the founder of IGALA, is now the director for Horses for Mental Health. And Felipe was just on in May, they had their big mental health awareness month with the horse campaign. And Felipe was one of the guests on there and talks about, the depression and how horses and what horses have done for him.
So really he was riding his way away from and through depression.
Healing.
Okay. So this is interesting. I mean, you talked earlier about the idea of horses as metaphor, and I was asking you, what do you feel horses are a metaphor for? And I do think that, everybody, would you not agree,
Oh,
whether they're horse people or not, when people think of horses, they think freedom, don't they? You think freedom, you think that's a free animal. If I sit on the back of this horse, it will take me to freedom. You think about the image of the cowboy, you think about riding the range. It's about freedom in a world that seems to be less and less free. Do you feel that with the Equus Film Festival, you can give people a sense that they can find freedom through whether it's by actually sort of doing these things that these people are doing, these sort of pilgrimages people are doing, or just through the stories themselves?
I think that's a yes to both. One of the films we had a couple of years ago was called the Gobi Gala. And my friend Julie Vilu, who runs the Vilu Foundation, she started this ride in Mongolia in her 60s and she didn't even start riding till her mid to late 50s. She started this ride now to help build schools and libraries for the children in the village, in the Mongolian village where she first went to do a horseback ride, because she saw these children scrounging for food and clothing and everything else on a garbage dump. And she thought, my God, I have to be able to do something about this. And so since then, we've showed her documentary, and we've had people who, after they've seen her documentary, have gone and ridden with her. Every year they do an annual ride now, and they actually have 5 or 6 different rides they do in Mongolia, and it's completely changed her life. Getting into what she's doing now, it's like another whole phase of her life happening. I've seen this happen time and time again with so many people, with the horses, when it's their time to be part of your life, there's nothing you can do to stop them from coming on and driving and taking you where you're going.
The people who come to your festival, I should imagine they're primarily horse people, but are you getting the general public? Are there people who are showing up to the festival with no horse background before?
A little bit, but they usually come as guests with someone that has horses. A good partnership would be with something like, say, being a little off, kind of like what I want to call off Broadway. But when Sundance does their big festival, they'll have like rooms that do either cat films or very specific genre films. That would probably get a broader audience. But I think, and the sad thing is that no matter how good a horse documentary is, it's still a horse documentary. And the industry, as far as the other film festivals and that, they tend to not show horse themed films. I have no idea why. It doesn't make sense why they wouldn't show it. And it amazes me, because some of these are some of the best movies I've ever seen, just from a pure emotion.
Sure, and cinematic. But in terms of the audiences that show up to your festival, do you get non-horsey people?
Only from 90% if they come with other people, like with a horse lover.
So it's like
then they get kind of
they have to be initiated,
and then they don't want to leave.
Okay,
yes.
So for example, with the Horses for Mental Health, or with the Mustang issue in America, I happen to know that it's costing the taxpayer, I think it's 150 million a year to keep these horses in these holding pens, which are not very nice, if they don't end up going shipped down to Mexico to be sold for the meat. And these are issues which, of course, don't get into the mainstream unless people find out about them somehow. Obviously, therapeutic riding, and working with horses in mental health, this now is edging its way into the mainstream. Obviously, I work in the field, and people are starting to be referred to us. But it's a slow process. What do you feel you could do? I mean, you're obviously already doing it, but what do you feel the festival could do more to bring the idea that horses are integral to human mental health into the wider mainstream, so that they don't have to stumble upon your festival
Right.
with a horsey person? How can we move it further into the mainstream, do you think, this message?
Well, we're in the horse world to reach further to get to more people. We've started what we call the Mustang Summit, because part of and it's kind of a different layered answer, but the Mustang Summit has been developed to be an educational platform where we talk only about off-range issues after the horses had been rounded up, in those 60, 70,000 horses. What can we do with them? There's two really distinct camps in the wild horse world, and there's kind of the wild horse extremists that think they should just stay out in the plains and nothing should be done with them and let them be wild. And then there's the people that have Mustangs and love them and realize that the Bureau of Land Management, which the other camp thinks is the evil overlord, has been tasked in 1971, when the Wild Horse and Bureau Act passed. They were tasked with managing these wild horses. They're just like deer. I don't want to be in a country where we have an open season on hunting, where we give a hunter a license to go out and pull 20,000 horses. That happened. That was called how kennel racing got started. So in order to stay out of that, we have to have roundups, and a certain amount of those horses have to be rounded up every year. Well, when you bring that certain amount of horses in, in the U.S., we have the Chincoteague ponies. I think everybody knows what the Chincoteague ponies are, where
Yes,
they round them up.
For those listeners outside of the USA, Chincoteague is an island off of the coast of Virginia. And there's actually a few of these islands, they're called barrier islands, where horses washed up from shipwrecks hundreds of years ago and have established feral populations, some of which are quite famous, like Chincoteague. Okay, I'll shut up now. It's back to that.
Well, the Chincoteague model works because the fire department for the last 70 years and in Chincoteague has kind of overseen the pony population. They round them up every year. They swim them across a channel. They give them their shots. They keep a record of who's who. They take the younger horses, the babies and the yearlings, and they auction them off, and the older breeding stock gets taken back to the island to start a new crop. And that model works. We have all different kinds of what's called HMAs out west, horse management areas, where people love, say, Sandwash Basin. There's beautiful, very colorful Mustangs that come out of that area. People love them. If we started to do like with the Chincoteague model, where you're cultivating a group of people who want those very specific Mustang horses, then you've got your buyers, and every year you have people who are waiting in line for that roundup to happen to bring those horses in, and so they can auction or pick their horse out of an auction. And so that's years away, creating that. So in the meantime, we still have 70,000 horses, 65 or whatever the number is, it changes, that we have to find homes for. So with the Mustang Summit, our goal is to educate people about the prison programs, the veteran programs, the youth program. There's a youth program in Utah that turns out 50 to 60 horses a year through their tip training program, with their kids and who have gone through the adoption, the welfare system with the kids, and the kids who are going through all of the
foster
it's
care.
youth at risk. It's
Yeah.
a youth at risk program.
Mhm.
Those kids are the ones doing the gentling of the Mustangs. And it's called 3 Point Center. They do an amazing job. So the Mustangs work with youth at risk. They work with Sue Ann Wells, who has her program in Chattanooga, Tennessee, with her Inner City Girls program, who are doing dressage with Mustangs. And then they work with all of the other programs that are out there. So that's what we try to do with the Mustang Summit, is to at least educate that part. But in my heart of hearts, I genuinely believe and feel that 130 years ago or so, maybe even 140, everybody at some point was around a horse, whether it was a horse pulling the milk wagon or delivery wagons, or horses were by humans. Still in other parts of the world, horses are by humans all the time. And you want to get deeper into the conversation, you don't see youth committing suicide in those countries at the rate that they're committing suicide in this country. We've had daily interaction with sentient beings, horse or cow or whatever. Now we are removed from that because nobody's around horses on a daily basis, except for those of us that have horses and know what they do. And I think that horses are here for their next part of their journey with the humans to heal us. That more importantly, not to be a riding instrument, which I would not give up riding horses, period. I love getting on my horse and riding, but to whether people are riding, whether they're doing therapy with them or whatever, that horses are here to heal us. Horses are here to bring people back to what they're missing in life. And that's that connection, that, call it heart math, that finding your center again, finding your peace. And you can do that when you're with your horse. Or a horse, any horse.
Well, I like what you said just now also about that it wasn't just horses, it was being around sentient beings. Obviously we have pets, but I think that our relationship with our pets can be different, because what does a horse do? It carries you, or you rely on it. You know, what did a cow do? You relied on it. If you have a hunting dog, I suppose, or a guide dog, a seeing eye dog, or a sheep dog or something, you rely on it. But of course, the vast majority of people with pets, I have pets too. We don't. We just have them as a feel-good factor for our mental health. Really, that's why we have pets. Right. But it is true what you say, I think, and something I hadn't considered though is that yes, the malaise that you see through the youth of the Western world, and I think probably the industrialized world everywhere.
Yes. Yes.
It seems that mental health is deteriorating, that depression's on the rise. And despite the fact that life has materially never been better. And it's interesting that you say in the countries where people are around sentient beings all the time in a way that they're around them, you have better mental health. It would seem that suicide, for example, and that sort of thing, not so much of a factor. That, I think you've just answered my question for what's in it for the mainstream person, because let's say you're listening to this podcast, say, well, why should I listen to a podcast about a festival around art and film with horses? I mean, I live in an apartment in London or Queens or Buenos Aires or Cape Town. It makes no difference to me. I don't care for horses. But I think the point that you're making about being around sentient beings, back to where we went to with heart math earlier, is important. And it seems that you're somewhat of a prophet of this. Where would you like this to go? You've established now a very successful festival. You could say you're self-actualized with it. You're kind of making a living from it. You've taken this idea that everyone said was just this silly little niche idea for people that like ponies, and you put the lie to that. Obviously, you're educating people about the Mustang issue. Obviously, you're educating people about horses and mental health and so on. But where would you like to go back to yourself as a little girl? Where would you like to really go with this festival? What would you like to see it do?
I'd like to see more people, non-horse people, coming and seeing this magic, because it's magic. I mean, it's so powerful, and I don't care whether I'm showing films, and I still do this 3 times a year at a library by us. I'll take a group of our documentaries and we do a little movie night at a library. And you see people walking out in tears just because they're so moved. They're just, they're just so moved because they simply had, people will go just keep saying, I had no idea. I had no idea. That seems to be the chant of people who've seen horse movies that are about mental health or veterans or kids, therapeutic uses. They walk out and they just go, I just had no idea. And I'd like that to be more people to be experiencing that, because these filmmakers work so hard to pull these stories together and to share them with people, and to let someone experience, to have the experience that I had the first time I saw your film, to want to make it everybody to see that. I think everybody who takes the time to make a documentary about horses, or what is going on, whether it's a good one or a bad one, they've still put their heart and soul into that storytelling.
It's really interesting. As you were doing this, I was inspired to just jump on Google, because it reminded me of something I read a few months ago, which was that for people who are stuck in cities, and I think this came out of lockdown, that watching nature documentaries, for example, wildlife documentaries and nature documentaries, turned out to be incredibly good for people's health, not just their mental health, but actually their physical health too. And of course, what is a horse but nature, and where do horse documentaries take place? And I was just thinking, well, what's in it for me if I don't care from horses? And I've just got something here. It says, in a new study published by Oxford University Press, experts described how television shows can ultimately not benefit not just the planet by making people more interested in nature and the causes of nature, but it backed up something which had come out from the University of California, Berkeley, where watching nature documentaries of any kind was shown to be one of the best ways to boost your mental health and decrease stress. And of course, we know that stress is a physical thing. It's not just something that happens because the amygdala in the brain signals your body to produce cortisol, the stress hormone. That stress hormone we know is a neurotoxin. So people who are stressed all the time, which is most people in our culture, are suffering, physical health degradation from it. Would you posit that by producing this documentary and sort of this festival and putting all of these documentaries out there for people to watch and giving them a platform where they get to television and that sort of thing, you're actually benefiting people's physical as well as mental health way outside of the horse world?
I would love to think that would happen.
It seems the academics think it is. It's very interesting to hop on to Google. It seems to be a hot topic right now. I just did one little search here, and it seems that it does come down to reducing stress, which makes perfect sense if you think about it, I guess, because if planet Earth is where our organism, because humans are organism, is pre-programmed to be in, and of course we divorce ourselves from that, then to beam something into a living room, to beam something into a cell phone, surely must reconnect one, even if it's in a metaphorical or a virtual way. Something in our organism must respond to that. Would you not think?
Oh, I think for sure, because we're mammals. I mean, we are the same type of being that the horse is. We just can have the ability to think a bit more, but and some there that could be questionable at some time with some people, but
I noticed you looked
that's
at
where
me
the
when you
word
said
horse
that. Yeah.
comes from. But there was we also do commercials, have commercials in the festival. And Equine Productions, who happens to be based in the UK, did a really nice piece, a little commercial for the mental health. There's a mental health group that takes care of the jockeys and people who work at the racetracks. And when you were talking a little bit about people in their apartment or this and that, but I'll bet you there's a bunch of people who are gamblers and or race horses and
Yes.
that
Yeah.
kind of thing. I mean, the
Dark side of
horse
the racing
industry
world.
affects
Yeah.
them that way too.
Mm.
Yes, the dark side of the racing world, but still a horse world. But they did a beautiful little piece, and it just kind of scanned. I think it was at Royal Ascot, and they would zoom in on someone in the crowd, and they would say, has body issues. Just maybe it's a jockey or one of the ladies serving. And then the other one would say, dealing with grief. And it would just keep zooming in on different people. And it made you stop and think, everybody's got a story. Everyone has something going on. Everyone needs what the horse has to give them at some level, because everybody has something going on in their life. It goes to that I have a little sign in the kitchen that says, be nice because you don't know what the other person's going through. You'll always be nice because you don't know what the other person's going through. You don't know what kind of day they're having. You don't know what their home life is. You don't know whether they're going through a parent dying or something. I mean, you just never know. So never take it personally.
What would to me, this goes beyond horses, and it goes back to the healing power of story. Right. So
Yes.
There you are as a little girl, and you're growing up in a household where you're seeing your mother die slowly from grief, basically in front of your eyes. It manifests as cancer, but effectively that. And you see your older sister functional, but walking dead to some degree because of this terrible guilt of what happened to your brother, even though I'm sure it wasn't her fault. It's just a freak thing. And then you fortunately have this creative, dynamic father who includes you in everything and encourages you to be creative in every way, and shows you the creative power of what people often don't think of as creative things, like the engineering side, the building side, that actually pointing out to machine tooling, that sort of thing, that is actually as creative as writing a novel or producing a piece of art. Then you get into obviously horses and horse breeding, and suddenly you want to run a horse festival to promote stuff that you wouldn't normally see in your regular horse show. And that leads you into this very successful Equus festival. But really, it seems to me what you've done through the whole thing is you've identified the healing power of story, and you've created a nexus whereby people can be healed through story. It happens to be primarily about horses, but it obviously could be pretty much any story. If story is at the root of healing for humans, and festivals are where we find out about and celebrate and give our attention to this type of healing, I think everyone who goes to a festival of one kind or other always comes away feeling uplifted, inspired. I know there's a lot of people out there probably listening who would like to do a festival. It's certainly always been in the back of my mind. Oh, God, I'd quite like to do a festival someday. I think a lot of people have this idea. Give us your nuts and bolts as the engineering side of you. How do you put a festival together, and how do you make it work? Because most festivals don't work. How do you make a festival work? How do you do it?
Team. A great team. having a great support team, people, really good people helping. I've learned especially with the Equus component of this festival, with the film component, that we partner now with in the middle of July, I'll be at Briarfest at the Kentucky Horse Park, which for those out there that don't know what Briarfest is, everyone, I think globally knows what Briar horses are. They're the little model horses that come in a yellow box, and every little girl usually has at least one of them. But Briarfest gets about 40,000 people every year at the horse park. I go down there and we'll do a day of screening the films. I've learned to partner with other festivals. We come in as a component to festivals now with the Mustang Summit, where we have the film festival and the Mustang Summit kind of running simultaneously. One, because there's some overlap between the documentaries and the storytellers of those documentaries, which happen to be horse people, who then in the morning they can go watch a seminar with that horse person, and then go in the evening and watch a documentary and sit through a Q&A with the filmmaker who made a film about that horse person. So I've learned that throughout the years. COVID was killer for 2 years, but we learned how to go virtual. We learned how to do a lot of stuff online. We have a film channel, the Equus Film Channel, where people can go and watch. I think it's $7 a month. They can watch some of our horse documentaries and films on demand.
The Equus
we have
Film
an app.
Channel.
It's taught us how
run
to
by
do.
you? Is that run by a large media company?
Film Festival Flicks is who we are. We are their horse channel. So it's a company out of LA that I work with, and we're their horse content. So it's a whole dedicated channel called the Equus Film Channel. There's an app that we have that's Film Festival Flicks, and then we're on that app. You know, you learn. When before COVID, we were doing quite a few tour stops around the country. Every month we would be in a different location. Canada. I remember sitting down with you one time. We were at the Abilities Expo for the therapeutic expo, where people could come and get their stuff. And you and I were talking. You were talking about at one day this film festival, would be able to carry it in a suitcase. Well, we've gone from being in a suitcase to now it goes on a hard drive. So we can go anywhere with the film festival and screen these films. So if a little goal I have, I'd love to be doing something with. Next week is the 5 riding schools are doing a big presentation in Spain. And I did not know until a friend of mine is going to see this, that Abu Dhabi now has a classical riding school. Did you know that?
I did not know that. We're talking about Baroque classical dressage in the vein of the Spanish riding school of Vienna.
Yes. So the Spanish riding school is there. The Portuguese school is there. The Andalusian school is there. The school from France is there. And then the the school from Abu Dhabi is there. So the 5 schools are coming together to do a big presentation in Spain. So I would love to take the festival to Abu Dhabi. I think that would be really cool to take the film festival there to do a weekend screening or whatever, maybe Germany. And we did a little short one in France, and we're talking to some people in the UK. So now that we're all past the COVID fear, I think we'll be moving a little bit. Things have loosened up since January of this year. So since this January, we've been almost every month I've been somewhere else with the film festival. So it's finally shaking.
At what point would you say, let's talk about money. I think when people get an idea for a festival of any kind, there's an initial rush of enthusiasm. And then they say, oh, but shit, we need sponsors. how do we do that? And everyone sort of scratches their head and
Yeah, we need
looks the other way. How do you get the money to run a festival? Talk to us. Let's say everyone's listening now wants to run a festival. What's the A, B, C, and D of how do you get the money to run a festival?
We still need sponsors, but we take the money that we get from sponsors and you make the ends meet at that event and you do the best you can and you pray for a little bit of a turnout with people and you then plan for the next one. And
what do you do to get it off the ground though? Do you have to just put in your own money at first?
You put in your money. You either put in your own money or you have people who are willing to put money in, and that's your sponsors. And Equus has been very lucky because we have a couple of people who really believe in what the mission is that regularly make a nice donation to keep the mission going. But, it's don't do it if you think you're going to make a fortune, but do it. I do it because I'm passionate. I believe that that every time I say, damn it, I'm not doing this again, somebody sends me a really great film and I'm like, damn it, I want everybody to see that film. And so as long as the creators keep creating good horse stories, I think there needs to be someone out there reviewing and patting them on the back and maybe giving them an award for taking the time to make that content. And before we were in existence, before Equus was here, and to any big sponsors out there that might be listening, this is why I think it's a responsibility of a Purina or your bigger people who exist on horses. Their business exists because of the horse. They should be the ones really carrying it on this, because without those people getting those stories to us and us being there to say, wow, you did a great job, or here, let's have an audience that will actually see it, then that little film will get made and it might go on YouTube. Somebody might see it on YouTube, but only per chance. And then it just is out there in the internet world. So at least with us, someone sends us a film and it gets shown to the different audiences, and we help get these stories out. Because otherwise, how are they going to get out?
So Purina and the big feed companies and they're not yet sponsoring you?
Not yet.
Okay.
No, well, and that's after 11 years. So.
Okay. Are you actively going after them? Saying, hey.
We are knocking a little. It's after the 10th year, things are changing a little. Like people go, oh, you're not going away.
Okay, so longevity is an important thing. You got to stick around.
Oh yes,
okay.
Yes.
Talk to me about the structures. You said donations. Are you what you'd call in America a 501c3 or a non-profit? What people in England would call a charity? You are a for-profit or a non-for-profit organization?
We're a LLC. What I found, and again, this is in this country, I know a lot of people who've had some really great nonprofits going, and Egala is the classic example. Lynn Thomas and Greg Kirsten started that organization, and their boards voted them out, got rid of them, which, once they wanted to, once it was successful, the boards got rid of them. So
Palace coups.
Yeah. Yes. So I just think that this mission, we've really been able to stay true to the mission of what Equus is. And that's being the home to the storytellers of the horse world, whether it's through film or art or literature. That we've been able to stay true to that because I don't have a board saying, well, we don't like this film. So I don't, we don't have that, the heavy hand of, you're a nonprofit, you can't do this. So
but presumably,
we're
though,
for-profits. So
in the American climate, though, people obviously can give money to a not-for-profit and get a tax deductible donation from that. And that allows people with nonprofits to to fundraise quite effectively. You're saying you,
Right.
to some degree, denied yourself that mechanism. Do you think that it would be easier if you were a nonprofit to get sponsors and funding?
It's a half and half, because right now sponsor dollars are so tight everywhere. Even people who are nonprofits, sponsor dollars are tough to come across. We haven't gone after that yet, that part of it yet, because when COVID hit, I wasn't sure whether we were going to be able to keep it going. And then when we were able to keep plugging along through we had 2 virtual festivals with COVID. Had to do it completely online. It worked. It was, I don't know how we did it, but we did it. And people had fun, and people won awards, and we pulled through it. But, this has been a year to regroup. This year, this is the first year since COVID that we've really, gotten really back into things 100%. So.
But basically you're saying then that the Equus Film Festival runs as a business like any other business, and it has to sink or swim depending on.
Yes.
So the people who donate, who become sponsors, what they're doing is they're investing in a business. Are they investing in it looking for a return, or are they investing in it as angels?
They're investing as investor angels. Yeah.
So
looking to keep it going.
Okay. So if you're somebody out there, and I'm sure there will be people out there, and one of my goals with this podcast is to help people who want to make a living doing the quote unquote impossible, as I have, and so on. I want them to know what the mechanisms are, because when I was younger, I couldn't really find people to mentor me and answer those questions for me. And I had to sort of piece it together over years. Let's say someone decides to go your route. They say, okay, I want to do a festival. I've been listening to this Lisa Diersen lady. She says, okay, the danger of going the nonprofit route is that you could end up getting voted off your own board. Okay, copy that. So now I've got to find angel investors, because it's not a purely commercial enterprise. I can't offer people a shareholder thing or something, at least not for the first 100 years. How do you go about finding angel investors? What's the ABC of that?
Well, one of our bigger investors is someone who fully believes in what we're doing mission-wise with connecting the veterans programs up with horses, and horses up with the veterans programs, and getting that message out across the country. And that they feel that work, just simply being able to get that message out there, is as important as, if they were giving to a nonprofit that was running a program. Just educating people that these programs are out there is really important. And we do that just simply by doing what we do, being who we are, telling these stories. Another believes in making sure that the message on the Mustangs keeps getting told. And we do that all the time, because that's just part of a lot of our story.
So there are people out there who are willing to invest, who share the same concerns and passions,
yes,
mental health as you. How do you find these people? Would you say that someone who
they found us?
Right, that's what I was going to ask you. So if someone again is listening to this and says, "Oh gosh, all right, I'd like to do this thing. I have this cause. I would like to do a festival around this cause. How do I go knock on doors? Or is it more you just got to start doing it and then people notice?"
Just do it. Somebody asked me about this in an interview, and because when we started this, all I wanted to do was to have people see your documentary. I didn't care how I was going to do it. I didn't care what it took. I wanted people to see. So I was lucky. I had a friend who owned a theater, but unless I asked him, your film isn't going to magically appear there. I had to go and talk to him and get him to let me use that theater. Thank God Ron was as gracious as he was, because that's how the first festival got off the ground. It and ran for a whole weekend in a beautiful theater with an amazing technician running the films, and me not knowing anything at all about how to run a film festival except for, okay, here's the movies, here's where they're going to start. And the poor guy, I wasn't even putting breaks in between the films, but only by the grace of God have I learned how to run a film festival now. But the first year in New York, we did it in Harlem and did it in a theater where I had 3 screens and 100+ movies. And I thought, oh, this will be fun. And I literally ran myself ragged trying to help the projectionist make sure that everything was starting when it was supposed to. But you just have to do it. You just don't sit back and go, oh, well, I can't do it because of this. I can't do it because of that. If you believe in what you're doing and what your mission is, I hate to use that word, but I fully believed. I mean, I was so passionate about, these are great stories. People need to see them. I'm going to do it. I just did it.
And but the reason you wanted people to see them was you had already a passion for how the horse can heal, which I presume,
had a passion for horses, period.
Right, but you yourself had been healed by stories of horses as a girl, as well as by actual horses.
Yes.
But had you not had access to an actual horse, and you'd been in that household watching your mother die of sadness, those stories about horses still would have carried you a long way through, no? So from that early experience to now, you fostered a knowledge that story can heal, and story about these healing animals can heal it even more. What are the biggest mistakes you've made putting all this together, would you say?
Oh my gosh, biggest mistakes. It's just not having enough money ever to do it the way I wanted to do it. And I'm not even sure that's a mistake, because that's created another learning opportunity. That's taught me another way to get something done. So, that maybe partnering with some people that you partner with because you're at, you need to have that extra money and to make it go, to make the film festival go. And it's not exactly who you'd want to partner with, maybe that. And I don't think those were mistakes, because through those mistakes, through that having that happen, I learned how to deal with other parts of it. So, I learned a lot about the wild horse people through different things. I went into it like Pollyanna, thinking that if everybody loved Mustangs, they were all, everybody was in this la-la world loving Mustangs, not knowing that there were completely one radical group on one side and another rabid radical group on another side. It's
right. And you find yourself
every issue is that way.
Basically, is the message there that there are no mistakes. It's just all learning curve.
Yes. But isn't that life?
I would say so, yes. Sometimes one can say, does it have to happen with a baseball bat? Could we not have it happen with a polite cup of tea and a blank check, please?
But would we learn that much, Rupert? Would we really learn? Would we be where we're at right now?
I'm willing to find out. I'm ready. Well, I think what also happens too is that when it does go smoothly, of course, and it does actually quite a lot of the time, more than we give it credit for. I think what happens is, of course, because of the negative bias in the human brain, you remember your close encounter with the elephant more than you remember all your peaceful encounters with the elephant, because that was the one that made a big impression. But that also where you learned probably the most about elephants. I'm just saying, if you're sort of a bushman in the wild. So but I very much agree with you that when it seems that one has made terrible mistakes, in retrospect, generally, one looks back at those and go, oh, that was actually where I learned the most about how to make this thing really work. I just had to see that extreme of not working in order to understand where the middle point of working was. But at the time, I couldn't quite see that because there was a lot of stress going on. But yeah, I think for listeners, I grew up always being told, oh, Rupert, those things you want to do, you can't make a living doing that. You can't make a living through horses. And I remember thinking, but there's this thing called the equine industry. I mean, someone out there is making a living at it. Why not me? Oh, Rupert, you can't make a living, writing books. Well, but there's this thing called the publishing industry. I mean, someone is out there fueling that, right? It's not just a bunch of self-publishing aristocrats or something. No, there's people out there making a living. I mean, films, the same thing. Well, you can't do that. What I realized was that people meant they felt that they couldn't do it, and that if you did it, it would make them feel bad about themselves. So they would try to discourage you. And so what you had to do was not listen to that. And I was discouraged earlier in my life. And there were a few things I didn't do because people talked me out of it, which I later realized actually I could totally have done and maybe will at some point. You seem to have been somebody who also has made your living. You made your living through horses. You've made your living. I know your breeding has been successful with the Lusitanos. You've shown successfully. You've made a great success of the Equus Festival. And you say, okay, maybe it's not as much money as you would have wanted, but the fact that you even have made it into this 11th year and it's still running and it's carrying you, that's an extraordinary achievement. I mean, we know that that's not anything to be sniffed at. But a lot of people out there do feel that they can't live free and ride free as you have. And of course, you are making a festival that shows people living free and riding free, literally. What do you think people can do to unlock themselves from that little nagging voice that says they can't?
Well, don't you think saying I can't is just your fear?
Well, sure. But I mean, fear is a real thing. So what is people...
Right. It is a real thing.
How in your, do you feel people can create a practice where they can begin to climb out of that hole?
You've got to. I just went through this last year, and I know you went through the same thing too when you went. And I didn't get a chance to ask you before, but like when I broke my leg last year, that first time, well, first of all, having to go almost a month before I could go back into, even maybe a month and a half before I could even go back into a barn and see my horse, was like the worst part of my life that I can remember. But that the first time I sat back on my horse after I had got my boot off and I made the cast and could put my, I didn't even have a riding boot on yet. I was able to wear my barn clog. To sit back on my horse, I don't want to say it was terrifying, but I was like, oh my God, am I really going to do this again? Because going through the pain, mine was a compound spiral fracture completely out my ankle. So it was pretty painful. So your mind is saying, you don't want to go back through that again. But I was just saying, I am going to do this. I'm just going to do it. I cannot go the rest of my life not riding my horse. I can't do that. It's too much of a part of me. And so I just did it. And even if the first time was just going and walking around the indoor arena and getting back off of that horse again. And this was my white stallion, who I had just gelded maybe 3-4 months before, a couple months before I had my accident. So he was still feeling all testosterone.
Still a lot of horse, yeah.
Still a lot of horse. And even though he's 22 now, and he's still a lot of horse.
Yeah.
But I sat on him and I did it. And I accomplished that. And we came out of COVID and I went, are we going to do the festival again live? But we went ahead and we just did it. And I had that last year because we did it in Sacramento, California. because that's where we ended the ride, and everybody was in California. I had an author come in from, oh my gosh, not Finland, Norway, I think, Sweden. She came in from Sweden, who came all the way there, lost her luggage at the thing, but she just did it. She just came to the festival because she was so excited about coming and being part of it. If you just do it, just take that first step and just do it. It makes doing it easier every time, the next time you do something.
It's what it comes down to. I mean, one could say feel the fear and do it anyway, but does it come down to basically small steps? The idea that and what can seem like a small step to one person feels like a giant step for somebody else. I remember when I was younger having less patience. That's someone should just get over themselves. And then someone said, well, Rue, for example, you're terrified of eggs. I know that you will rather leap out of a first floor window than first floor in the European sense, or third floor window than eat an egg. That someone pulls an egg on you. You have Achilles heels that you don't think you have. What if I said to you, just get over it, just eat that egg? And you're sitting there overcome with nausea, and suddenly you're like a little autistic child going, I actually really am afraid of this, even though it's just an egg. This is not sitting in a riot in South Africa or other things that have happened to me that I find the egg more scary. I do. And someone pointed that out to me and said, what would it take for you to eat that egg? And I was like, actually, that's a really good question, because it's become like a phobia. And I suppose if I had to, what it would probably take is extreme hunger. But let's say it wasn't that. It would be somehow making friends with the idea of egg. You know what I mean? And somehow runny texture and the stink and all the things that nauseate me about them. What would I need to do to get over them? And I realized, yes, to many people, that seems completely absurd. And they'd say, Rupert, just get over it. And to me, that's this huge thing, even though one has faced things in one's life that are obviously much more real. And well, what would it take? And I thought, well, I suppose it would take breaking what looks like one step for somebody else down into as many steps as it would take for each one of those steps to not feel like a big step, which could probably be 100 or 1,000 steps, which somebody else would roll their eyes at. But for me, or someone with a phobia about spiders, or somebody can't get out of bed because of depression, and I've been there, I know you've probably been there. It's that first half step, that quarter step, that eighth of a step, that 16th of a step. What's the fraction that's doable now, today? And can that, because I think what happens is that we all judge ourselves by other people. And we think, let's say we want to write a book or you want to do a festival. We say, well, there's Lisa Diersen, she's done a festival, or this person over there, they've written a book. And you've already projected yourself in your mind to the finished festival, the finished book. And then there's that moment of euphoria. And then there's that, but I can't, because I don't know how to do that. I don't understand the mechanisms. And you would say, just do it, or but really then you said, just take the first step. So is it about finding that first step, or that first half step, or that first fraction of a step? Is that really what it is? Do you think?
Yeah, I think, yes. For me, it would be eating bugs.
See, no problem with that for me. Munch bugs all day. Yeah, totally.
Oh,
as long as they haven't got, as long as they're not presenting an egg.
All day. Yeah. No, you just have to, it doesn't matter how big the step. It's just as long as the step is forward.
Yeah. I forget which, is it Lao Tzu or is it Confucius, or it's one of those. It says, never mock somebody who is engaged in an endeavor in which they're moving forward, no matter how incrementally, or no matter how tiny a fashion. They are more courageous than your mockery, and they'll probably get there, or they'll set into motion a process where even after their death, that thing will probably be achieved. I guess, would you say that by showcasing these stories about people taking these journeys, because it seems that the films that you've listed as the sort of mussies, that they all seem to be journeys, pilgrimages, really, to wellness. Would you say that really what you're doing is you're showing people taking those steps? There's a first step, isn't there? They mount the horse and they take a step.
Right. Yes.
The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Mm-hmm. Single hoof print.
And I guess we can then follow the traces of the hoof prints of those who've gone before us.
Right.
And find our way. Okay, so I just want to go back over some of these films that you've said that are the must-sees. You mentioned Riding My Way Back.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Healing Horses.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned The Long Rider.
Yes.
And you mentioned Unbranded.
Unbranded is available pretty much so globally. I think I have Healing Horses up on the Equus Film Festival YouTube channel or on the Equus Film channel.
How do people access the Equus Film channel again?
There's a link right on the front of it's equusfilmfestival.net, which is our website. There's a link right on the front page.
Equusfilmfestival.net. Yeah.
Yeah. And that takes you right to the film channel, and people can subscribe. And then the Felipe's film, The Long Rider, it's out for distribution right now. So I'm not sure if they've got their distribution in place. So the only place that anybody can see that is when we're doing one of our tour stops with the film festival. So I think we will be screening that in West Cliff, Colorado in September. But the other film that we were talking about too was Lady Long Rider, which is the story about Bernice Endy.
Lady Long Rider, right?
Yeah, and that film, that filmmaker has available. I think if you just type in Lady Long Rider Bernice Endy, it'll pop up where to go to see that, because that's available pay-per-view on the filmmaker's own channel.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful documentary. It's very well done. It's at that time when she filmed that, Bernice was down riding 2 Haflinger horses around the country, up and down the continent, so to speak. And so we had a documentary, A Man, a Mule, America.
A Man, a Mule,
America.
And how do people see that?
Pardon me. I'm trying to remember the name of this film was probably 7 or 8 years ago, but he followed, because at one point before the continent of the United States was actually a continent, it was a lost sea. There was a lost sea in the middle, and Bernie Hubert is the filmmaker's name. And Bernie had a mule with a little wagon. Like, the wagon was only big enough that he could sleep in. And he followed that whole trail all the way down from Canada to Mexico, to the Mexico border, with A Man and a Mule across America. Just the story.
Exploring the lost ocean, the lost prehistoric ocean.
Yes.
Can people find that on what can people find that on equusfilmfestival.net?
I know he hasn't got that back out yet. It's getting re-released this year into the film festival. It was on PBS a few times.
Okay.
But he's updating it, and it'll be in this year's film festival again.
Fantastic. Now, you said that the film festival is happening live in West Cliff, Colorado.
Well, we have one that'll be in West Cliff, Colorado, that will be a big Mustang Summit.
That's the Mustang Summit. Okay.
Yeah. And we will be screening films there. So that's
when is that? Yeah.
September 29th and 30th, and then October 1st. And then our main festival is in Sacramento, California, November 17th, 18th, and 19th.
Okay. Where is Westcliff, Colorado?
Westcliff is on the southeast side of the Rocky Mountains. So it's directly south, about 2.5 hour drive from Denver, maybe
So
3 hours.
around
Denver.
Pueblo area, would you say?
Pueblo, Colorado Springs area.
Okay. That's the Mustang
South
Summit.
of Colorado.
So Mustang
Yes,
Summit
there'll
is
be
the
a big
27th,
Mustang.
7th September to October 1st, basically.
Yep.
In Westcliff, Colorado. And then the film festival itself and the General Arts Festival will be in Sacramento.
Yep.
November, again, give us the dates.
17th, 18th, and 19th.
17th, 18th, and 19th. And they can get all this information on equusfilmfestival.net.
Yes, on the website.
Okay. If somebody has a equine arts project, how do they submit to your festival?
They can reach out to me via email, or they can go to the website or reach out on our Facebook page. But our website has applications for the artists. It has applications for filmmakers. It has applications for the podcasters and for the authors.
Perfect.
So all of those applications are available right on the front page of the website.
What is the email address if people want to get through to you?
It's Lisa at equusfilmfestival.net.
LISA, Lisa.
Yes, at
Equus.
EQUUS FILM Festival, FESTIVAL.net.
.net. Lisa at equusfilmfestival.net. Well, hopefully some of the listeners will be submitting some of their stuff. You guys should remember, take that step. If you've got a project, Lisa's one of the nicest people in the world. She's not going to write you a letter back saying you suck. So, and if it doesn't make it into the festival, she'll have advice for you about what to do. So,
and if I look behind me, there's at least 300 books in the festival that I have on shelves just behind me. So that have been entered over the past couple of years.
And even if something doesn't make it in, what are your words of encouragement to people? Because, this happened to me, when I was submitting stuff, submitting books, submitting films. It wasn't always successful. People didn't always take it, but I didn't take that as meaning that I should stop submitting.
Right.
What's your word of advice for people who are going through that process where they're sort of laying their work on the line for acceptance or rejection?
Well, I do that every single time I have another festival. I'm putting it out there for people to either like it or dislike it. But what I can tell people is, first of all, if you've written something or made a piece of artwork or created a film about something that you're passionate about, somebody out there is going to acknowledge it. And maybe you're just sending it to somebody who doesn't understand what you're trying to tell them. And that doesn't mean anything. That means just simply the person you sent it to wasn't the right person. To just keep trying, keep sending it. I mean, you know what it's like to keep sending in a manuscript and being told no. So you just keep trying and keep at it.
By the way, most good books, most good films were turned down by quite a few people before they found their homes. And it's easy to forget that, music too, bands that seem to come out of nowhere, and then they get interviewed and actually, no, we were gigging for about 20 years. It's just that we started in middle school before we had any kind of break. I agree with you. It's to keep putting one foot in front of the other thing. Don't give up, whether your dream is to have the festival or whether your dream is to put together pieces of art that get shown in festivals, or both. The art of story and the world. It's interesting. I feel that the world never runs out of the need for story.
Oh my gosh, no, there's always another story. There's every single living human being has a story. Everybody has their story. Everyone has a story.
Yeah.
Everybody does. And I think you become an adult when you realize that everybody has a story, and you need to give everybody kind of time to tell their story.
Mm.
When you figure out, oh, wow, it's not just about, I'm not special. I'm just one more story.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet each story is completely unique.
Mm-hmm.
And
It
each
is.
story is healing if it's given the chance to be. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Lisa, thank you for coming on and turning us on to the healing power of story. Thank you for letting the listeners know that Equus Film Festival exists. I would really encourage you, if you're listening and you're not into horses, check it out anyway, because you don't need to be horsey to appreciate a good story. And you don't need to be horsey to appreciate a story about, what was it that you said? Sentient beings, the human relationship with sentient beings is important for human health. Maybe there'll be something to be learned. I hope to catch up with you at one of the festivals. It's been a long time since I was there, and it's sort of given me a bit of a kick in the pants to get to it again, actually. So I would love to. So maybe we'll see some of the listeners there. Any parting words before we close, Lisa?
Well, anybody who wants to do it and has a dream to do it, get out there and do it.
Okay.
The world is waiting for your story.
It's very true. And it doesn't matter. People say, well, who'd be interested in my story? It doesn't matter if it's only one person. I remember when I was first trying to raise money for the human rights work that I used to do. And it started with an event I put together to which 5 people showed up.
Yeah. But you changed those 5 people saw it, Rupert.
Well, what happened was one of those 5 people went and spoke to someone. And I got a phone call 3 months later from someone saying, you don't know who I am, but I've been researching this thing that you're talking about. And yes, I see this is a good cause and I'm going to back it and do it. So never think that it's wasted time. Never think that any audience is too small. I agree with you, Lisa. Get out there and do it. Get out there and tell the story. Tell the story.
Look at what happened because of your story. This is why this festival exists.
Well,
because I was motivated by your story.
Well, you're very kind. It seems to me, though, that really what happened was perhaps my story was a catalyst for that little girl who had discovered the healing power of story decades before, where she needed that healing in that house that had that tragedy. And so I'm honored if my story was a catalyst in that, but I do know from what you said that you'd have done it anyway. And that's a wonderful thing. So I'm honored to be the catalyst in what would have, in an avalanche that would have happened regardless, because you're a force of nature, Lisa. And by the way, if you're interested in the Lusitano horse, and you jolly well should be, because they're the best riding horse on the planet. I'm sorry, but they are. You should check out Lisa Diersen as a breeder. The horses she's producing are wonderful. But I'll let you find that through Google. Lisa Diersen.
Well, and any of those people out there that want to find that don't have pockets full of money and want an amazing horse, the American Mustang horse, because of its Iberian ties, or the Lusitano horse to the Mustang horse's Iberian ties, because now we found through all the DNA research that every horse on the planet originated on the North American plateau. So actually our Lusitano horses are descendants of the original Mustang horses. And when those horses went off over the Bering Straits and came back around and went to the Andalusian and Iberian Peninsula and became Spanish horses, they were reintroduced when the Spaniards came to Mexico and tried to conquer Mexico. That's how the American Mustang horse got reintroduced with the Spanish blood. Mm. And that's why they thrive on the North American plateau, because they're back home. I mean, there's an amazing documentary called Return of the Horse. And I'll send you the name. Sharon Elashar was that filmmaker, and that is on the Equus Film Channel.
Return
probably
of
one
the
of the
Horse.
Return of the Horse.
Mhm.
Everybody that's a horse person should watch that. It's very, very, very good. It was financed by the Spanish Horse Foundation or the Spanish Mustang Foundation. And it's a beautifully well-made documentary about the origin through DNA research of Equus caballus.
I'm just Googling it now. Return of the Horse.
And it's
2000.
Sharon. I think it's Sharron or L.S. Shar was the filmmaker.
Oh, okay. So I'm on imdb.com. Return of the Horse is a highly researched scientific and historical documentary about the North American native horse spanning over 57 million years. This documentary explores the science and history of the modern horse, its evolution in prehistoric America, and then return in the historical period with the Spaniards in the 15th century, the impact on Native Americans, and finally, the Euro-American relationship with the wild horse from establishment in America till today. That sounds like a must-watch.
It is, and you can watch it on the Equus Film Channel.
Okay, I will be there. Also, what you say about Mustangs is true. My son, Rowan, I still maintain a horse for him, and that horse is a Mustang.
Oh, Rupert, you and I need to talk further about that, okay? After this.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm absolutely sold on the Mustang as a therapeutic as well as a riding horse, because there's a level of intelligence in there that is, it's not that all horses aren't, but yes, you and I both know that there's something extra there.
Yep.
Problem solving abilities and so on. Okay, well, Lisa, it's been a treat. Thank you.
It's okay. Thank you.
It's been an inspiration. Those of you who don't know who didn't know that Equus Film Festival exists, now you do. So get online or go to it. Thank you for creating it, Lisa.
Thank you for being part of it and having me on your show, Rupert.
Oh, well, I hope you'll come on again. And,
I will, whenever you need me.
Well, maybe what we should do is we should do a podcast from. That's what we should do. We should do a podcast.
That would be fun.
From the film festival,
Yes.
and then we can.
And then you could meet a whole bunch of interesting people who would be there and podcast with them.
That would be a very good thing. We could interview them right there. Okay.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
There.
Okay. Something to look forward to.
Yep.
All right.
A lot of fun.
We'll talk.
Okay. Nice seeing you again.
Likewise.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Next time.
Bye.
Much love. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Join our website, newtrailslearning.com, to check out our online courses and live workshops in Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Athena. These evidence-based programs have helped children, veterans, and people dealing with trauma around the world. We also offer a horse training program and self-care program for riders on longridehome.com. These include easy-to-do online courses and tutorials that bring you and your horse joy. For an overview of all shows and programs, go to rupertisaacson.com. See you on the next show. And please remember to press subscribe and share.